welcome here to the Adelaide Baptist Church for this event put on by Community Land Scotland. I am sorry to tell you that we're going to have to change up the order a little bit tonight because unfortunately Dr. Stephen Mullen, who is supposed to be speaking first, has been involved in a small accident in the city centre, and so he's not going to be able to make it this evening. The good thing is that all of your free tickets can be absolutely refunded. So don't worry about that, any that are watching the purse strings. So we are going to have to change things up slightly. Does make it easier for me because I didn't read my notes beforehand, so we're mostly going to have to change it up. What we're not going to change is being here tonight to be able to celebrate the story of community land ownership in Scotland and to speak to some really amazing and inspiring people who are involved in the community land movement here in Scotland today and in community activism in Govan in particular. This event has been put on as part of the Simon Fraser Memorial Series. There are a number of events that are going on across Scotland to celebrate this series in Egg and Gia, up in Lewis and Staffin and in other parts of Scotland. Well done for obviously choosing the most picturesque part of Scotland, Sauchiehall Street, to come and take that event on. The event's been put on in memory of Simon Fraser. Simon Fraser, a man very different to myself, in that he did a lot and spoke very little, as opposed to somebody who doesn't do very much and just speaks quite a lot. But synonymous with the work of Community Land Scotland and some of the original community land buyouts as well. So it's celebrating that history and that heritage that brings us together tonight, and also under the auspices of the 100 Years of Community Land Ownership project, which is being delivered by Community Land Scotland and funded by the Heritage Lottery. We're joined tonight also by some fantastic artists. We've got Johnny Cypher, who's going to come up and do some spoken word, and Jessie, who, in keeping with the theme of the evening, has had to stand in for somebody else at very short notice, but we're absolutely blessed that she's going to be up spending time with us this evening, and it was her lovely album that you heard as we've been sitting here wondering what the heck we're going to do to change up the entire running order of the evening. So I'm going to start off by trying to share some of that heritage with you, of that 100 years of community land ownership. So Ian from Community Land Scotland is going to come up and tell us about the 100-year project, and we're going to set the scene of the moment that we're in just now in relation to community land ownership by listening to Josh from Community Land Scotland as well. The two things that I've been tasked with telling you on top of that is that we don't have any practice fire alarms. So if the fire alarm does go off, well, in keeping with the theme of the evening of accidents, we should probably leave in a pretty orderly fashion out the back door, and the muster point will be out in the street there as well. And also that there's a space reserved in the Butterfly and Pig round the corner to continue the discussions later on. So without further ado, I just want to invite Ian to come up and start to tell us a little bit about the history of community land ownership in Scotland.
Hi everybody, thank you very much. I've been told numerous times by Meg that I should speak into the microphone and not wander off from it. Thank you firstly for coming along tonight. It's really lovely to see so many faces here. The Community Land Scotland project, which is that I'm working on 100 years of community ownership, Lean and Yerin. You'll see a little bit about it here, website, QR codes and such, and we've made a first attempt at a very stripped back timeline of the seismic most important moments in terms of community land ownership and that journey. We've done that in a way to try and hook people into the idea that they need to contribute their own stories to that. So to make sure that those stories and that experience and that knowledge isn't missing from the archive that we're trying to build. And the reason that that archive matters is that there's so much knowledge and expertise and awareness out there that isn't really accessible to the rest of us, that no one understands the difficulties of community land ownership like the people who have lived it already. So I would ask you all to have a look at the website, the100years.scot, 100years.scot, and to have a look at the timeline and to submit your own material to it if you are a community landowner. We've learnt a lot already. I've only been in this post since December, but I've learnt a lot about the human impact of community ownership and what a difference it can make to day-to-day life, to the future, mostly in small rural communities. Like, you see that because they've been maybe doing it for longer. But there's so much knowledge and understanding within a community setting in the city as well, that I live across the lane, across the road really, from a lane that is once people are here from Agnew Lane tonight. But to witness a community find each other in an urban context and how much good can come from that is a really kind of validating thing for me to witness. And it's been really nice to be aware of that from the sidelines whilst kind of entering this world and this job, which is really tasked about trying to capture all of that knowledge and make it accessible to everybody, and try to raise awareness about community ownership on a human level to as many as we can. As Martin said, the Simon Fraser Lecture Series has been happening as part of this bigger project. And in addition to that, there's also an exhibition, Where We Stand, which opened in Edinburgh on Friday. So that's the work of 6 different artists, which is travelling around. It's in Lewis and Harris this week, in Argyll and Butte next week. And then it continues its journey. You can find the details on our site or the Travel and Galleries website as well. So it's just turned into a big sales pitch. Is that what you're after? Yeah, if there's an opportunity to go and see it, it's much appreciated. And it's really nice to see work that's been done with artists working in a community which has gone on that journey of community ownership. And there's been almost all of those pieces of work have included a knowledge exchange of that artist's abilities and crafts being then shared with that community to access new skills and new abilities. It's going to do a big circuit round. It comes back to the Edinburgh Art Festival at the end, mid-August. So have a wee look and check it out if you can. And I think that's pretty much me. That's not 5 minutes, was it? So was it 5 minutes I was asked to waffle for? Excellent. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ian. So I thought, in replacement of Dr. Mullen, who I won't do justice to, I'd provide a little bit maybe background. So I'm Josh Doble. I run the kind of policy and advocacy side of Community Land Scotland, so I thought I'd provide a little bit of kind of political context of why we're doing this, why we're doing 100 years of community ownership, why we've recently launched a land reform campaign as well. So as Ian was saying, we're trying to spread the word of community ownership, the particular kind of history and journey that's happened in Scotland in terms of the community land rights that we have here, the very particular kind of history of resistance and pushback against kind of violent dispossession that's happened. We want to tell some of that story, shine a light on some of the really good examples, stories around, Egg, Gear, Assynt, some of the kind of historic, iconic buyouts that you can see over there, and kind of bring that up to date now to think about some of the challenges that we face in terms of social justice, climate justice, the pressing concerns that we have as a nation now, but getting people to think about those in terms of land issues. At the basis of a lot of our challenges within society are issues around land ownership. Who has wealth, who has power, that impacts upon things like housing, food production. So part of the 100 Years Project is the kind of good news storytelling. The work that Flora and I are doing on the campaign is to shine a light on some of these kind of bad news stories, get people thinking about the issues around them. And also, the aim of tonight and the aim of the Simon Fraser Memorial Series in general is to give people a sense of, I don't necessarily like the word empowerment, to give people a sense of ownership and empowerment about these issues, to show people that another alternative is possible, and that all of us, because of the particular legislation that we have, which there are a number of issues with, which I can get into, but I won't, there are a number of issues, but we do actually have the conditions here to take ownership of our future, to take ownership of buildings and land, and kind of not right those wrongs, but kind of take ownership of that history and shape it into something different. And we do have a particular opportunity at the moment. I won't go into loads of detail about the land reform bill, but there is a piece of legislation in Parliament at the moment which we're working very closely on. And again, this land reform legislation tends to happen kind of every 10 years. We have an opportunity in a moment here where we can show that land reform, land issues are an electoral issue. This is something that we care about, and we have a chance to shape that legislation. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with me, get in touch with Flora, see how you can take part. We want over the next 6 months to make sure this new legislation actually delivers the kind of change that we need. And I'm sure we will, on the panel tonight, hear about some of the challenges in Glasgow, and it'll be interesting maybe as I now join the panel, which was not the plan, to talk about maybe how some of those challenges can be addressed through legislative change and the kind of opportunity that policy represents. So thank you very much for coming. I hope you find it interesting. And I hope you leave with a sense of maybe how you could take ownership of something in your area, be that figuratively or actually taking ownership of some land and buildings. And I'll leave it there, Martin.
Thanks very much, Josh. So what I'm going to do just now is start to introduce some of the panel members. We have with us today some really inspiring folks, some of whom I've met for the first time through this process, some of whom I've had the pleasure of knowing for quite a long time. The idea is that we want to show you a spectrum of activism that goes from existing community landowners to people that have been involved in community organisations and govern, to folks that are involved in more spontaneous and citizen-led initiatives in govern, responding to some of the issues around land that are emerging at the moment or have been there for quite a while. So I'll start off just by introducing Maggie from Inchinnan Development Trust. Can you say hello and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, Maggie?
Hi, Martin. Hi, everybody. My name is Maggie Morrison. I don't normally sound like Marge Simpson, but I've got a bit of a cold. I'm a development officer with what is now Inchinnan Development Trust. Before we became a community landowner, we were Inchinnan Community Council, and we were really only concerned with dogfowl and people speeding through our small village. But our local woodland went up for auction without our community knowing anything about it, and that did cause a panic in the village, which then started our journey towards community ownership, and now our community owns Chuchenwood, which is just up the Clyde from Govan, across from Yoker. Inchinnan is beside Erskine, and it's at the back of Glasgow Airport, so it's a wee historical village. If we'd known what we had to do to achieve the community buyout, would we have done it? I'm not so sure, but we have done it. And we also have moved on to other pieces of land in our wee area of the world. So I think that just shows that even when you start out with no plan and the cart goes before the horse, you're still able to achieve things as a community, even when there's no money and there's no staff. But you still get it done, and then you move on to other things. So we have purchased a community woodland, and we have community asset transferred to another piece of land in Inchinnan, and we've got our eye on 2 other pieces of land at the moment. So I think that's probably enough for now, Martin, is it?
Yeah, thanks very much, Maggie. Thank you. Steg, can you introduce yourself?
Check. My mic sounds pretty bad. Does it? Does it sound okay? Yeah. Great. My name's Stephen Guilfoyle, but most people call me Steg. I'm a community worker based in Govan. I've worked in the community for over 20 years. I'm currently employed as a development manager for Sunny Govan Community Radio. I guess the reason I'm here today is because Govan is a community who is really feeling an impact of the value of land in a negative manner at the moment. We've always been challenged by land ownership. We've never had a community centre in Govan for over 20 years now, due to no spaces. But right now, with the regeneration going, or rather, should I say, the gentrification going in the community, we really find it hard to find spaces for community activities. Housing is a big issue. Local people feel they can't afford to stay in their own community. It's really causing a lot of concern and a lot of issues in our community at the moment. And I guess I'm here today to find out about how we can find solutions to rectify some of these issues. Although it's not all negative, I've got to say some of the positives that I've come out of this is I've seen young people from our community really get activised and take on these challenges, like Iona and her team at the Govan Docks. So yeah, that's why I'm here today, and hopefully I can contribute to the debate a wee bit today.
Fantastic, thanks very much, Steg. Iona, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Iona. And the first time I ever heard about community land ownership was when my granny moved to the Isle of Egg. I know that was bought over by the community and it was a real amazing thing and inspiration, but when you're a child you don't realise how much goes into it, how much work goes into that kind of thing. But I actually live in Govan, right next to the Govan Graving Docks, and I used to go walking there every single day. It's a beautiful place. I love it so much. But basically what was happening was there's a landowner that's bought the land and they want to build flats there. So I ended up getting really involved with trying to campaign against it, speaking to local people, trying to get them to say, do you want these flats here or do you want this land to be kept? It's a beautiful spot, it's a heritage site, so that's really what's gotten me into it. But the question that I want to ask actually, and the thing that I want to talk about tonight is how accessible is land ownership? It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work to actually own a bit of land, all the applications, all that kind of thing. It's a lot and it's not very accessible to working class people. So that's something I want to talk about tonight.
Fantastic, thanks very much, Eleanor. Josh, maybe a lot of folks in the room are going to be introduced. Can I just ask by a show of hands, who's been involved with or had kind of first-hand experience of community land ownership in the room? Can you put your hand up? Lindsay Chalmers for Community Land Scotland, you definitely need to put your hands up. Who's really been introduced to this topic for the first time this evening? Quite a few folks. So, you know, for a lot of folks, Josh, this isn't something that they've heard about before. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of community land ownership in Scotland?
Yeah, I can. I kind of, I don't know how factually correct all of it will be, but I can give you
Most of the room don't know anyway. So,
give you
know,
the broad strokes of it. And this is kind of based on a presentation I did recently, which is there's kind of like a potted history. And I guess, so speaking, I have a background as a historian, not of Scotland. I'm from England, and my research was based in settler colonies in the British Empire, but there's some kind of parallels there in terms of some quite particular historical events happened in Scotland that I think have given birth to the type of land reform that we see in Scotland, which is very much focused on community ownership. And I suppose a key thing to point out is land reform and community ownership are not the same thing. Community ownership is one form of land reform. And it's the form which is largely leaned on by the Scottish Government and is the type that is kind of community-led in Scotland. And I think that is due to the kind of very particular history of the clearances in the Highlands and in the Lowlands and the kind of resistance that sparked from that. And the resistance that I think was very closely tied to crofting identity and Gaelic identity and Gaelic culture. So that kind of ground up kind of like people's uprising against land injustice has got a long and like relatively recent history in Scotland, you know, in the last kind of like 150 years. So things like, you know, the Battle of the Braes, the Glendale Martyrs, these kind of iconic historical moments in the 19th century, I think kind of set the tone for communities, local people feeling a sense of empowerment and also still a deep connection to the land, which maybe you don't see in some other contexts. And so into the 20th century, we had the first, it wasn't a buyout, but, you know, in 1923, Ian, keep me right, the Stornoway Trust was established, which was Lord Laverhume giving the area of Stornoway and kind of adjacent land to the community there. But that, you know, that wasn't kind of a forced buyout. That was a gift, a very generous gift. But then, as we see the kind of like the more modern buyouts kind of kicking off in the 1990s, which were led by crofters in Assynt, who really wanted to take ownership of land that was being ruled by absentee landowners who weren't interested in what was happening. They weren't interested in the local development of the area, which is something that we still see now. And then following off the back of that, you had the buyout of Egg, which was, all of this predates the legislation. And then once you get devolution, one of the key priorities for the devolved Scottish Government was land reform. And because, in my view, because of that history that I've just detailed, the idea of like what land reform is this going to be is one that's focused on kind of community empowerment, communities leading that land reform. So in the 2003 Act, the first land reform legislation that was introduced, you had a community right to buy. So communities' ability to put in an application and then have a preemptive right to buy. So the first dibs, basically, when a piece of land comes up for sale. And alongside that was also a crofting right to buy, which was an absolute right for crofters to take ownership of their land. must say that the crofting right to buy has never been used. So this is kind of one of the challenges of this legislation. As Iona was alluding to, the legislation is not necessarily the kind of silver bullet here. I could go on, but I won't. It was quite long.
So a lot of folks in the room might be thinking that some of the examples that you're talking about in the history of community land ownership in Scotland really has its roots in the Western Isles and in the Western Highlands. What's the kind of spread like of community landowners now? Is it just still folks in the Highlands and Islands, or is that spread, to other parts of Scotland?
No, I mean, Maggie's a good example of that. It's spread. It's spread, but I think undoubtedly the roots of it are in the northwest. But yeah, it has spread. We have members in the borders. We've got members in the Northern Isles. We've got members basically across the whole of Scotland, and there's an increasing number in Glasgow and the Clyde Valley. Kerry and Heather, colleague and former colleague, ran a kind of community ownership hub, which was an action research project focused on Glasgow and the Clyde Valley to see if there was kind of dedicated resource working with communities, what was the level of interest, and could they kind of, not kickstart, because it was already happening, but kind of like inject real drive into the community ownership that was happening in Glasgow and the Clyde Valley. And the answer to that was yes, but as Iona again has said, it requires some of that kind of, that resource, because there's particular challenges everywhere, but maybe we can get on to talk about some of the kind of the different challenges in rural and urban settings. But yeah, it's everywhere now.
And Maggie, what was the kind of, the key moment for yourselves at the Community Council? What was it that made you think, actually, we want to do something about this, rather than just watching the sale go through?
Just the question you asked before about the Western Isles. Both my parents are from the Western Isles. My dad's from North Uist, my mother's from Harris. So maybe it's in the blood. I think it takes a driving force. There needs to be somebody driving the bus. And I think for this, it was myself in the beginning. And it's a bit of, it feels unjust that our woodland, our community woodland, which didn't belong to our community, but because the village is so old, we thought it was ours. So then to hear that it's on an auction site, and having recently lost a battle to stop a large housing development of nearly 300 houses on our green belt, we were still, hurting from that loss. So to think that we were then going to lose our woodland, that really got the fire up under people. So the first meeting that we had about what we're going to do about saving the woodland, there was nearly 60 people there. And from a small village, that's a lot of people. And I think there was a big football match on that night as well, so we had some competition. But it's the community that has driven everything that we do from the very beginning. It has been the community voice asking us, and I suppose we've answered their call, and then we've just got better at it. As it's only since 2019 that we purchased the woodland, so we're still a very new organisation.
And quite often you see over Scotland, community organisations, generally the start of community land ownership in a lot of communities across Scotland tends to be individuals, organisations who are threatened with losing something really important to that community. And the story that you see repeated over and over again is that coming together to take that stewardship of the land, to take that stewardship of something important to their community, automatically raises their vision in terms of the horizons that they're looking at. All of a sudden, they know that woodland's been there for hundreds of years and it's going to be there for hundreds of years into the future because of what they've done, and they start to think about what else they can do as well. Has that been your experience, and why?
Yes, definitely. And Steg and I were just talking about it earlier. Myself and my colleague Lacey, who's just out in the audience there, we created a grid. It was actually through a training course we did with Community Ownership Support Services with the Development Trust Scotland Association. So it's a bit of a mouthful.
Shout out to Linda.
And the grid was to prioritise your community assets. So you followed the grid and it worked out which assets were most at risk. So we thought we just had a woodland that was at risk, but it turned out we only had 2 other pieces of land in Inchinnan, green spaces left. Everything else had been developed or has been purchased by a developer to develop in the future when they eventually wear down the planning department to allow them to build on areas of significant natural conservation, because that's what's happening in Inchinnan, and that's one of the things that Inchinnan Development Trust has been asked to do by our community, is to try and preserve our lands and our woodlands from destruction, which I think is Scottish Government policy and local authority policy as well, so at least somebody's following it, the policies.
And how much does that story of, you know, seeing something that's so important to the community and a space where the community like to spend time, how much does that resonate with the story of the Govan Docks, Iona? And for folks that aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so the Docks is a really special place. I don't know how many people have been there, but it's really magical. It's a historic spot. The people who live in Govan now, their ancestors would have built the docks, so the thing is that's part of our history. And basically I would go there walking every single day, and there was a number of young people. We would all go and meet there, and we would have fires and things like that. So it was a really social space. It was a very dynamic space. Graffiti artists would go and they would paint there. Musicians would go and they would play music and things like that. But because that land is not being used in a way that can make money or can generate income right now, the land developer obviously wants to build flats on it. And I can see why. Obviously, you buy a bit of land, you want to make money from it. But I think a lot of the time it's partially just due to Glasgow City Council not having much money. So they'll just go, oh, well, you have it. Or I don't honestly know the full history with it. But I do know that I care about that bit of land. And obviously Glasgow City Council, they can make more money from council tax on flats there than they can from that land just being used for the benefit of the people. But if that land was actually to be used and restored fully for its own value, I think it would inadvertently bring in more value to the community. You know, it would bring in tourism. I don't really care about that, but you know, it would have so many benefits for the city. It would honestly put the city on the map. So I think a lot of the time with planning like this, it's almost like they're looking really small, really short term. They're not looking big scale. They're not looking long term. So for me, it was a very emotional thing. You know, I was very connected to that bit of land, and but it was also a very practical thing. You know, what's going to happen? You know, these flats, they're not going to help the people in my community. Also, the flats, they're luxury flats, so I think you have to have a certain income to even be able to buy them. I can't remember off the top of my head the price that they would cost, but it was way over what anyone locally would be able to afford. And then the community would end up almost being like a gated community where no one can get in unless, well, you can get in, but it almost seems like a gated community, you know, so that kind of pushing Govanites out. So it would almost just become an extension of, you know, a science centre, really built up riverfront. But I also think that having places where people can go, community spaces down by the river, is just so important, because it's like nature, you know, it's not just about making money, it's about actually where can people go, you know, mental health. During the pandemic, I know so many people, they went to the docks for a wee space to have a think, you know, for their mental health, just get a bit of nature, a bit of peace down by the Clyde, and these kinds of things, they're invaluable, but it's hard to measure them, and I think sometimes it's hard to convince the landowners that that's what should be done. But again, we'll see what happens. The council's just making their mind up right now, so we're just going to wait and see what happens with that. Yeah.
And what sort of things is the group's called Save the Govan Dogs that you've been working with? Or
Govan Dogs Collective.
Yeah. And what sort of things have Govan Dogs Collective been up to?
Well, we did a community event. That was a music event. That was really, really good fun. That was out behind the flats. It wasn't like we got permission to do that, so there was 2 police vans and about 20 police officers, so that was quite funny, having like local rappers, and then there was the tension there with the police officers and that kind of thing. But it was really fun, and it was really nice to see people in the local community and from further afield just get together. And some people were saying, well, what's music got to do with it? Well, what does it not have got to do with it, you know? This is an emotional thing as well as a practical thing, as well as it is, you know, something that's more logical. It's not just one or the other, you know. So I think having something like a music event where people can come together, showing, well, this is what the Docks is all about, you know, it's about bringing people together and having a space that people can go. And honestly, I think the pump house there could be restored, and it could be restored and used like a community centre for locals. So there's a lot of potential there, but we'll just have to see what happens, yeah.
Fantastic, thanks, Iona. Steg, over the last few weeks, we've had a couple of conversations about pressures that folks in Govan and many other areas in Glasgow are facing at the minute. You've talked to me
sometimes quite bleak terms to say that even during the 80s and over the 20 years that you've been working in Govan, that you don't think that people have been so hard pressed. Why do you think that is?
Wish you had the answer to that, Martin, then we'd probably have a solution. But things are definitely getting worse in the community. I just want to say here to what Iona said, very well put, Iona. We have very few spaces left in our community, docks being one of them. Being from Govan myself, I've spent many times doing the Govan docks. That is a place of therapy for our community, a place where we can go and get away from the hustle and bustle. We can walk our dog, we can go out on a Friday night and get away from the drama of the streets. That's got a value for our health impact in our community. Our community is like top 12 SMID index. We need more resources for health and well-being, and they're getting took away, and they're also getting more. Well, I said earlier on, gentrification, and Iona hit it as well. The houses in Govan, local governments cannot afford. The whole land ownership thing is something that governments are having to investigate in now because their back's against the wall. They've nowhere else to go just now. They can't afford the rents in their own community. They can see the value of the land, and they can see these real estate agents manipulating the land for the value, and we get that. But where's the governance going to go? Where are the people going to go? People are really feeling that strain right now. And I guess we want to find out about how we would move into the ladder of land ownership so that we can save some of these dear spaces for future generations. And there's not many of them left, and time is running out, so I'm kind of keen to put a bit of urgency on this as well. And Maggie's gave me some excellent advice so far, but land ownership isn't as easy as just getting the land. You need to manage the land, and that comes with problems as well. So I'm interested in all this, and I appreciate the conversation, but well put, Iona, well done.
What was that process like for you, Maggie? So you've decided, all right, we want to get involved in taking over this woodland. Practically, what did it look like? What did you have to do?
We just took one step at a time. As Steg and I were talking about earlier, if you looked too far ahead at the size of what you're trying to undertake, you know, you wouldn't start because you would think that's just too big for us. But you just take the first step, and there is so much help out there. I mean, we went to the Scottish Land Fund and told them what we wanted to do, and they were like, "Okay, here's what you do, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this." And it is that step-by-step help that you get, you know, from each of the organisations that you approach. And you can't be shy, you know. You have to ask. You have to go and approach and just get on the phone and ask the questions, and you will get the help. And that was what we did. It was what we were told to do at the very beginning. We were told to do all the training that's free, go to all the networking events that you can manage to go to, and follow the process. And that was what we did. And we didn't have a clue what we were doing, and we were all working our jobs, so we were doing it on the side. But 3 years down the line, we have 2 community assets, we've got a development trust, 2 part-time members of staff, we've got 117 members in our development trust membership. And yeah, it's I don't know how we're doing it, but we are.
Fantastic. Is that a fairly common story, Josh? And what are some of the mechanisms by which communities can express an interest in or even acquire the land itself?
Yes, yeah, so it's a fairly typical story, especially the first bit that Maggie brought up before of like there's a particular issue or challenge or threat that the community responds to, and that's often the kind of spark. And there's a very, even today there was an email from a community just out east of Glasgow who had a very similar challenge of, there's development planned on the Greenbelt right by where they live, and that's their response to it, and this may be the first step they take in a journey towards this. But in terms of how to actually begin that process, it depends who owns the land. And I mean, one of the challenges can be finding out who actually owns the land. There's a real issue of transparency. Again, to mention Agnew Lane in the south of Glasgow, real issues there for the community group to actually enact their rights, having to find creditors, having to find who the actual landowner is. We have in Scotland a kind of not only a uniquely concentrated land ownership pattern, but a uniquely opaque land ownership pattern that it can be very hard to find out who owns land, and there aren't as many kind of regulations and oversight over that. So it's a real challenge. But if the community can find out who owns the land, if it's a public body and there's an opportunity for an asset transfer, then they should speak to the Development Trust Association Scotland, Linda's team. If it's a private owner, then they should come and speak to us, Community Land Scotland, and we can help them on that process. So it's worth pointing out that these community rights are there. They're designed to be used as kind of like preemptive markers, so that it says, we're interested in this. If you put it up for sale, we'll buy it. What actually happens tends to be a negotiated sale. So the community speaking to the landowner thinks, okay, the community are really interested in this, and they pay market price, normally with help from the land fund. But that's normally the kind of the way in. And there's all kinds of kind of political and philosophical debates about market value. Is the market value realistic? The kind of public money being used to pay off landowners who may have got that land in ways that we would not necessarily see as kind of ethical.
We're going to have a really good talk about that this evening, actually. But
Yeah.
What's the Scottish Land Fund? Maggie's mentioned it, you've mentioned it. Maybe Steg and Iona are sitting here going like, I've got no idea what that is.
Yeah, so the Scottish Land Fund was set up in 2000, so actually before the first piece of land reform legislation, the idea being that public money would be put aside for communities and supported by Heritage Lottery. Communities could then apply to the Land Fund if they had a particular development project, if they're looking for to take ownership of land and buildings, then the Land Fund would be there to support that. So it's kind of one of the key pillars within the Scottish Government's approach to land reform. So it's like, give communities these rights and the ability and feel empowered to take ownership, and here's actually some public money to assist that. Because without the money, it won't work. And it's worth pointing out the Land Fund has recently been cut. As Steg was talking about, these are hard times, and the government have cut it from 11 million down to 7.1. And there's a huge amount of interest from communities around Scotland in accessing the Land Fund. So there is going to be a bottleneck there.
And what kind of stipulations are there? Is it just anybody that can do it? What kind of organisations are able to access that kind of funding, Josh?
So for the Land Fund, I'm going to have to pass that on to one of my colleagues who's pointing over there, because the Land Fund, I don't know, but you have to be a kind of compliant community body. So Section 34 letter, if you want to get into the real technicalities, but I'll defer to some of my colleagues in it.
I can answer that.
Maggie will tell you, actually.
Can you tell us, Maggie, what sort of things did you have to comply with to go through that?
Well, when we first went to the Land Fund, because we thought we need to buy the woodlands, so we need money. And apart from Mrs. Brown offering to buy it with her life savings, which we just couldn't do, we were sent to the Scottish Land Fund first of all. And they said to us, if you need to be in the right structure to buy land. So they advised us to speak to Development Trust Association Scotland Association, DTAS, about how to form an organisation in the right structure to be able to buy land. So we got masses of help from DTAS. And we decided that the best structure for us was going to be a company limited by guarantee. So we're not a charity, but we're a not-for-profit organisation. And that then allowed us to apply to the Scottish Land Fund for funding to buy the land. But you have to have all your community consultation. It's so important. And it was really easy for us because the community was driving everything that we were doing. And a business plan, business case. It's all very straightforward. You follow this, you just take it step by step, and you get the help, and you just follow the steps.
So for those folks that might not know, generally what happens with these community interest companies or companies limited by guarantee is a way to protect the asset for the local community. Your company needs to be set up with members, and all of those members need to come from that local area. Or I used to be involved in a community landowner in Inchinnan Park, and for us, we always had a remit that served the whole city. you know, we were always at a space for activism, for art, for a whole range of different things. So we balanced that out by having 51% of our members came from the G41 and G51 area, and 49% had to be actively involved in the organisation. So that was our membership criteria, that if you were volunteering and involved in the organisation on a day-to-day basis, you could be a member, but the majority of members were always going to come from the local area. We have got to about the halfway point. Johnny at one point was saying, will we have enough time for me to do a wee intro? I think it's safe to say, Johnny, we definitely have those extra 3 minutes for you to do that wee intro. So I'm with great pleasure going to invite up to the stage right now good friend of mine and a fantastic artist, Johnny Cypher.
Hello, how you all doing? Everyone all good? I'm just going to have a wee quick drink of this. I was sitting doing that way where you're drinking a cup and it's been empty for like 20 minutes, but you just keep on taking the last wee sip. Cool. I got asked to come here via Martin and Josh, and in the last month I've done my very best to educate myself about land reform, because I knew a shamefully small amount about the history of Scottish land reform. So I'm going to attempt now to sort of show you my findings over the last month. As soon as I came in, I saw this incredibly helpful border here. I don't know if anyone's seen this. Just as you're walking in, it's incredibly helpful when you can get a wee handout. It's at the back there, very good, just to bring it home. It's I've covered quite a good wee amount of it, which is nice to see. So yeah, I'm Johnny Cypher, I'm a rapper. I've been doing stuff in the city for about 10 years. I'm an educator as well. I've been kind of using hip-hop as a sort of Trojan horse to go into places and talk about social issues. And that's been sort of like what I've been busy doing over the last wee while. If you'll excuse me. So, to start off, I'll just get this one. This is my whole life. I won't deny that I'm hurt when someone tries to take a kick at my wee empire of dirt. You see, for me, there's no difference between the artist and the person, except for the artist in me tends to struggle with expression. I'm trying to reconcile having a sense of urgency while recognising that my biggest lessons are still out there in front of me. You see, I'm years behind the intellectual wing of the movement, and I've given up on the idea that anything is improving. The climate scientists losing all hope, the displaced farmers being forcibly removed from their homes, and this is all over the globe, yet we're addicted to growth. We keep extracting and consuming the resources until we're crippled and broke. And even with all of my passion, there's still very little I know. I could spend a lifetime in research and only have an incomplete picture at most. This changes everything. Pretty significant quote. Naomi Klein took a figurative grip in my throat until I was like, wait, whoa, shit, I forgot. Wasn't this the reason I wandered down this very particular road? You see, I was kicked to the curb in a relationship that made me feel indifferent and scared, and I distracted myself like a lot of young guys do with civil affairs. And the first thing I learned is that we treat the environment like it was never there. I remember crying, honestly, genuinely wondering if we're prepared. Excuse me. Where's the anti-war movement? It's hardly there. We live in a country that has led the crisis, right? That has cut the earth up into a million slices. Why don't we use the tools that have been provided to declare that this is one of those threats that has the power and the capacity to actually unite us? All of these issues, while at first seemingly isolated or all connected, are they not part of the same root cause? Man, we're heading towards total global annihilation. But the opportunities that are presented by some of that meaningful climate action is paradigm altering. And I'm sick of reducing that to just, my mind's wandering. Every day that I wake and bake is a wasted day, and if I make the change, I remain the same and I waste away that pain in vain, and all while maintaining that I'm not playing your games. I can imagine tomorrow they would hire the military to protect the resourceful and private industry over the horde of crying innocents, horrible, violent imagery, and we're going to have no plausible deniability. I guess it's good for the health to just pretend we're progressing, pretend the climate summit in Glasgow was anything other than an internationally sanctioned group therapy session. This is the kind of shit that I'm really scared of addressing. I can't imagine a conflict between us that doesn't end in aggression. I've poisoned myself with an excess of the resin, become a shell of the person that can suppress the resentment. And I hate that I'm my biggest obstacle. I really wish giving a fuck was optional. I was building up my stuff, but then I lost control. And looking after myself, that's a laugh in itself. One of the main reasons I'm feeling trapped in this hell. It takes discipline. A certain state of mind, I guess, I don't possess. People try to hold my hand through change, and I'm like, I'm going to know I'm stressed. A tired and deflated body leads to a tired and deflated mind, and I know fine well, even as I stand here and say these rhymes, that I'm falling way behind. I can't ignore the ache inside, and whenever I try to shake it, life kicks my door down to remind me that it's all just been a waste of time. If I wasn't a rapper when I started this, in fact, I wasn't a rapper when I started this, I'm a rapper now. And I'm going to rap about whatever I want to rap about, because trying to do these other rappers proud has got me running around in circles, paying homage to a culture that's either left behind or undernourished. How am I supposed to be a credit to my genre when I've only become fed up with the finished product? Even most of the artists that I used to hoard up don't seem to give a fuck or even bother. Do I need to decide whether or not to be the reader or the author of my own story? Thank you very much. Woo!
Just a warm-up, folks. Now for the main event.
No, thank you very much, Martin. No, I appreciate that, guys. I'm always, it's a lot more uncomfortable for me to stand up in front of a crowd of people that are so inspiring, people that are getting involved in things like land reform. I'm kind of used to having a big beat behind me, playing in a wee small venue with some of my pals. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. When I try and take my art form a little bit more seriously, I try and do things tailored to events like this. So I've really put some work in to create this. I did my best to memorise it, but it's a bit long, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand in front of you and risk the fact that I would just forget it constantly. So I brought my paper. I hope you can forgive me. All right, so let me just riff this. Can you describe the world as you see it? Can you step back and explain your view of politics and philosophy so that all these other people can read it? Can you tell me about the places that you love, the country that you're born in, the place of your birth? Describe your family and what you love, what's your favourite lunch? First, describe the history of the land in which you belong. Can you tell me about the historical problems and what the obstacles about the obstacles of your area have been, and what the hopes of tomorrow will bring? Tell me, when you look around at the world, who is your enemy? Because when I look at the world, from my understanding, the growing inequality is no mistake, it's no anomaly, nor does it seem to me, however tempting, to be entirely intentional or even malicious in its intent. It does bother me from my excuse me. Thank you. It does bother me from my vantage point, at least, that the board is set, that the rules are just the rules. It's more mousetrap than it is Monopoly, and the players are just playing, often under the impression that their increasing acts of acquisition are merely a form of strategic protection for them and their families' hard-earned possessions. And it's honestly, if their conscience was really to stop them from progressing, wouldn't they just get taken over by a more psychopathic competition? As we develop further into the asset economy, leaving behind large swathes of the population, who are we, either selling what little they have to receive short-term dose of financial liquidity, or indeed, like myself, finding their choices severely limited? I could get my hands on an asset like a house or some land if I sacrifice X, and that amount is getting steeper and steeper with every year that comes around. Yeah, the runaway effect. Money being funneled from public to private holdings isn't new to our generation, or even to a century. Nor is it inevitable or unimpeded. There have been countless tugs of war, serious victories won by communities then and now around the world, attempting to supersede the centralisation of wealth and power, some successful, some defeated. But the magnitude of this redistribution of wealth, especially since COVID, the magnitude is something I would argue is noteworthy. Billionaires who have only really existed for one of 1,000 centuries, a fraction of a second of the cosmic calendar's trajectory, grew their collective wealth from 5 to 15 trillion, respectively, just during the crisis. If you're someone who is up to date with the data coming out of Panama, then you know that there's trouble in Paradise Papers, or who understands what the wealthiest gets up to in the hotel penthouses every weekend all across the world. You can literally hear your stomachs curl. The disgusting mess of self-indulgence where in place of community organising, they've got plastic cards and increasingly digital currencies that can stimulate the strength of decades of mobilisation and cohesion in a single swipe, or even the signing of a piece of paper. Their capital, violently stolen from healthy circulation in service to a perverted, bloated archetype of success, trotting around the world, buying anything they can get their hand on to compete with one another, and they're taking it off of hard-working men and women all over the world. These hard-working men and women who will never in their lifetime see the 2% hit their bank accounts took to absorb them and their histories. A tale of two cities becomes a tale of two planets. One Playboy Mile High Club feasting off the exploitation of the other, institutionally supported by a neoliberal ideology that really should have seen its demise after the 2008 crash if we had any genuine authority. Now a lumbering undead idea, thriving on a lack of workable alternatives, actively squashing resistance with this equivalent of a petty cash budget preying on our unpreparedness. We haven't created a crisis yet for these people. We haven't created a crisis for this group. We've had too much on our plate. Even now I'm overwhelmed as I'm reading about all of these books and finding out just how much is on stake. And as this monstrosity comprised of millions of millionaires, thousands of billionaires presses on, crushing anyone it comes into contact with while burning to the ground the bones of the delicate biodiversity and ecosystem from which it sustains its overdrive, we arrange and organise its fate, but not to drive them away, because that would polarise the debate. We grow, rise and we wait, hoping one day that we may be able to help to moralise in the state, while the others mobilise, just taking more and more of a hard-earned cash to add another couple of acres to their already oversizing estates. We, the ignored, the playthings, the consumers, the worker ants, continue to pull at our receding hair, too stressed about this month's outgoing balance and inequality, never mind the environment, helpless in the face of such reckless industrial extraction. Our weapon has always been the same against this globular, chaotic ball of conservatives just getting away with murder. What we're less adept at is organising. If there's anything I've learned from Machiavelli, it's that I'm an easy example of a rapper, meaning the best, but really having little effect. As an activist, I babble and garner respect, but whenever it comes time to spend the capital that I collect, there's always another debt that's in constant need of my attention. Let me be a wee bit more direct. I'm a cadet, a student that, to be honest, shouldn't even really be standing here rapping, affecting your overheads. Not to this group of people that are mapping the potential counterattack while already overstretched, attempting to manage how we can all resist, especially as the current cost of living strains our collective tolerance. And while the strategy may appear to some as obvious, the role of other artists may become more synonymous with pointlessness. I'm convinced lately that a lot of artist politics might even just be performative. Used to be provocative, not just a gimmick. Forgive the intrusion, I sometimes wish I could resurrect some of my favourite artists to come back for the dead, write a song enough that's strong enough to wake us up from the fact that we're actually losing. I never would have figured on it. When I was 21, learning about the world that I'm living in, I would have been so shocked if I was to come back here at 33 and find that we're sleepwalking into an oblivion. I'm no organiser. Hell, I'm not even an activist. I'm just a rapper, trying to catch up with this ever-prevailing narrative that there is essentially nothing that we can do collectively to challenge this. Until I stand in rooms like this, my arrogance can get ahead of me. It's humbling attending and listening to all these characters that are faithfully carrying the strategies that may actually one day lift us out of fakery. I honestly can't tell you how many paragraphs and books and prepared for this I've been sifting through, the projects and post-analysis that I've had to do, the practices that I can now give to you, as spinning plates I've spun to introduce hip-hop to indifferent youths, losing focus on the future because it's ripped to shreds, dipped in fluids, flammable chemicals, and then I picture groups like this, and meetings just like this, in all these different rooms, trying to make a difference to a world that is distinctly blue. And I've been known to turn a shade of blue, given in it's true. But I knew the minute that I came in here that I would get the fuel, and it didn't take any use too long to. Already you've lit the fuse. I swear to God I'd be a nihilist if there wasn't so much shit to do. You remind me that the fight against those who own the land, we put our weight into things like organising community buyouts, or before all that, just holding the current landowners to more ethically orientated community standards. Make sure that our land benefits our people. It's no complicated, you know. All around the planet, this struggle's been more or less equal. I'm not patriotic just for the sake of it. I don't mind being a wee bit nationalistic if it's internationally accepted that the common antagonistic elements are the capitalist pigs in Parliament. I mean, historically, there's fundamentally less difference between one country's working class and another. From the aristocratic landowner standing in the way of our dreams to the principalists and the clergy when the Spanish took the Philippines and auctioned off land that was being used, communally owned, just like when the Highland clearance uprooted many of our own ancestors from their homes. Different shades of capital, a certain different shades of dominance. Thriving in a lack of social cohesion. And for my part, I'm sick of all this performative dream weaving. Now I realise that you people are here fighting for a better tomorrow, achieving great victories like in the Isle of Egg, or when the Isle of Gear was purchased and what that was done to the land to bring it back to its original purpose, to the Ask St Crofters and the North Harris Trust. Just a couple of examples in the last decade of communities coming together to separate this invaluable land from those who would just let it go to waste, or worse, solely reap and hoard the rewards, rather send the profits ashore than see them spent benefiting the wider people of Scotland, a people incidentally, it's forming a resistance to this evil, absorbing that which we should be nurtured, protected and sovereign. It's a battle we have in common with the working class around the world, who have also not forgotten that when we work together, we genuinely do have the power to stop them. Looking around at this room, I feel empowered and often inspired by the victories that you've got and the networks that you're forming, the ideas that we're exploring together, the aged, old and modern. No matter what you think about the Anders Holtzpauls and Countess of Sutherland, they'll never do more for us than what working for one another can. And we understand the battle and the wars in front of us. We know the tactics, the methods will be deployed to break and discourage us, slow us down and pummel us with legal tape, lobbyists doing whatever they can to become effective at stopping us from claiming that which was robbed from us. And when we take it back, could this country perhaps inspire a global audience to keep fighting for that tomorrow that we promise our kids is just around the corner? It's a future that's not inevitable, but it's not completely gone. So join together, carry on, until we get the bastards on the run. Thank you.
Oh, you're not getting away with it. Fantastic, Johnny, that was amazing. Johnny wrote that all on a bus trip to Devon, as you do. I just stare out the window. Johnny writes massive soliloquies that are fantastic. One thing that I know that you really take seriously, Johnny, is your research. And I know that you said there that you spent a bit of time looking into community land ownership. From somebody that you know, self-confessed never knew anything about it, what struck you when you started looking at it? What inspired you? What surprised you?
I don't think I've got enough time to answer that question properly.
Well, we've got loads of time now. All my notes are redundant.
I'm fascinated, guys, by the idea that if we were in control of our own land, how that changes what the priorities of that land are. Anything, in my opinion, that isn't judging a section of the world's health on profit or GDP, if it's judging it by any other metric, I find that fascinating. And I find that a lot of the times, at least from what I could tell from a limited amount of research, is that when community land is bought and it's owned by the community, that GDP profit isn't the main incentive. It's really about trying to create welfare for people. And I would love to see ideas like that catch and capture the imagination of a wider audience, and to see where it could actually go when stretched out to its most exaggerated form.
Totally. No, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head. When we look at, you know, how we value anything in society at the minute, it's generally for short-term financial gain, right? The only sense of value that we've got is something which makes financial sense, you know? Whereas I think community landowners start to think, well, what does this mean for the people that live here? What does it mean for the environment? And it's that lift in your eyes that Maggie and I talked about earlier, that doesn't just say, right, how can I turn a profit on this bit of land that I bought for 20 quid in the 80s and have just sat on for the last 30 years? It's more about, right, okay, what are we going to do with it? Were there any examples or anything in particular that you found totally inspiring?
I think, I ended up in a rabbit hole talking about, learning about the Philippines. I didn't realise that the communal land that was owned in the Philippines was very kind of similar to how we were pre-enclosure. It was all communal land. People it was just made sense to people to treat the land that way so that it benefited each other. And I was learning a lot about how the history of the Philippines it just fascinated me. And when the Spanish came over, they did what happens in every place where you've got groups of people with capital that can just go in and divide up the land. They draw the lines, and then all of a sudden these people that were working the land, that were communally owned, were all paying taxes and rent to these landowners, and the money and the profits and everything was going away from that area. To me, even though it's developed, I was trying to look for other examples, so not just Scotland, to see how it compared. And every time I looked at something, it just seemed like the same story. And I mean, I know that every single culture's got its own history and it's very, very different in its own ways, but that kind of fundamental idea to me seemed that it was just people with capital coming in and pissing about, you know what I mean? And just sort of taking the piss. And that really annoyed me, and it kind of made me realise that, generally speaking, what has to be done is we need to kind of account for that. I mean, I must apologise in the room. Everyone was having a really nice kind of conversation. I came in a wee bit angry there about billionaires and millionaires. This stuff does annoy me, but I think a lot of my anger is actually rooted in not knowing what it is that's happening, because the more that I spoke to, I think, is it Nori Hill? more I spoke to Norrie, the more like Norrie reminds me that like we don't need to like rage against the machine all the time. There's a lot of people in government and in the Scottish government that are actually amenable to these ideas. What will make them more amenable to these ideas is if we actually get the numbers in our own communities to make it more palatable to these people that are in government. We don't need to fight them and bloody, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. And you go, Josh.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Johnny. I think sometimes the more you know, the more angry you get as well. But it depends. But no, I hear what you're saying. I wanted to just come in on the point you were making about kind of international comparisons, because actually that's something, we work with the International Land Coalition. There's a lot to be learned internationally. And in a way that's comforting that there's like an international solidarity. There's a lot of pretty much all countries in the world really dealing with a lot of these challenges. And when we work with the International Land Coalition, they look at some of the things we have in Scotland. I think that's great, the community land rights, the fact there's like a land reform agenda. But there's also a lot of challenges here, how concentrated the land ownership is. And it's kind of insane. And just one example, I don't know if people have heard of what's going on in Kenmore by Loch Tay. There's a US corporation called Discovery Land Company that have bought Taymouth Castle, bought most of the village of Kenmore, and bought Glen Lyon Estate, which kind of goes up Glen Lyon behind. And they are essentially building like a millionaire's playground is how they pitch it, kind of a gated community. An extreme version of what Iona's talking about in Govan on a slightly bigger scale. But the point is they've done this around the world. And so actually there's kind of a kind of amazing network of solidarity that's developed between, people in California, Barbuda, Portugal, now Scotland, of people pulling together and be like, what can people do on a kind of community level to push back against very powerful interests? And, that means the people in Barbuda took Discovery Land Company to court, took them to court in London. And so there's something empowering about that. It's an uphill battle, but there's a lot to be learned internationally. And I think, and even from events like this, a sense of solidarity that people are fighting against these issues. There can be something that helps with that kind of raging against the machine. But the raging against the machine gets you to the initial point of being like, let's do something about this. Yeah.
Just the microphone, just in case there's anybody online or somebody that's got a look.
Okay, sorry. So I'm a stained glass artist, and my husband and I run a stained glass studio, mid-sized studio, and we got a gig to go up and review and look at the glass at Taymouth Castle, and we had to sign NDAs and everything like that. But really my point is, but we didn't get the job, by the way. A group called Rainbow Glass got the job. But what's interesting to me is how this dialectic kind of operates. I'd like to talk a little bit about the council and how they're also criminals in this sort of issue of land and how they've sold a lot of our land, our common good land, from under us, etc. But Heritage Scotland are actually part funding the refurb of Taymouth Castle. So you can go to Heritage Scotland and ask them to help you in this kind of instance, but they're also funding to keep the glass for rich millionaires to enjoy. So I think there's this dialectic thing at work, and it would be nice if we kind of spoke about that maybe a wee bit as well. Sorry, I just wanted to tell you about that. The glass is really beautiful, by the way, but anyway.
Yeah, but I think that's got to be slightly careful about what I say here. Yeah, there is some big challenges, in terms of the planning process in Perth and Kinross Council, and the fact that, as far as I'm aware, this corporation are using an old planning permission, which is pre the National Planning Framework 4, which would have meant that they couldn't do everything that they're doing. They're using a historic planning permission, which the council has allowed them to do. And so there is something there about us as citizens, as communities, trying to hold councils to account, because they're not always, they can be very supportive, but they're not always. And I don't know if people from Govan or Maggie want to speak a little bit about the problems or challenges maybe of working with Glasgow. You don't want me on the soapbox yeah. for Maggie, for planning. Really, no. It's actually what takes up a lot of our time as a development trust. Time that we should be spending on our community projects is dealing with. It's like it's battles. You're battling a system that you shouldn't be battling. You're having to fight where your voice should be welcomed.
and is supposed to be part of a process, but it's stifled and on mute. As a community council, which I'm still part of, as well as the Development Trust, as the statutory consultee in planning applications, it's so frustrating because you can spend days on an objection to a planning application that is going to decimate an area of natural conservation, and it doesn't go anywhere. There's lots of rumblings, but nothing happens. We can't stand up to the lawyers that these large developers have, and they then go to the Scottish Reporter at the Scottish Government and overturn anything, you know, that we would object to, or that even if we get our planning departments on board, they then go to the Reporter and have it overturned at the Scottish Government. And as communities, we have got no right of appeal, but the developer does. And how is that fair? How do they have the right to appeal, but communities don't?
The odds are completely stacked against you when you don't have the resources to employ people to go and trail and find out outdated planning laws that can be used, or to lodge appeals on your behalf. What sort of spaces can people go to for, you know, if people are interested, or what kind of support is there to help turn some of those odds back in the favour, Josh?
So it depends a bit what the challenge is. You know, there's good organisations like Planning Democracy. You can go and speak to about issues like that. The community in Taymouth and communities in the south of Scotland who've got particular issues around commercial forestry development. Again, developers just thinking about how they can maximise profit from land, not thinking about the cumulative impact of the development that they're doing. There's great organisations like the Environmental Rights Centre for Scotland, who have legal teams who can look into this. You know, they're not afraid of taking the government to court. But there's a bigger challenge here, I think, which ties into what Johnny was talking about, of needing to fundamentally shift how we're thinking about kind of economics and what development looks like. Because until we stop thinking about GDP and profit and think more holistically about some of the things the government talks about, like community wealth building and the well-being economy, which seem like buzzwords but are potentially dramatic ways of changing our economy, developers are always going to win out because they're the ones who've got the money, they've got the resources, they're talking in the language that the government finds appealing because they're talking about profit and development. So it's challenging, but these things only change by being challenged, you know, by actually holding people to account. But that's exhausting, and I think the point that Iona made earlier is one that's really important to talk about, of the kind of the disparity and the challenges facing particular communities in terms of kind of taking up that fight. It's like, it's exhausting, it takes resources, and it's something that I know we've got, we want to do research on around kind of like poverty and inclusion, about people's access to these kind of rights and their ability to challenge these things, because it's a real challenge.
Maggie, did you want to come in there?
Well, I kind of feel I have to shine a wee bit of light on this, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. So we have found a way in Inchinnan to our planning department. It's not that they don't want to work with us, it's that the system is broken and they don't have the resources, they don't have the environmental expertise that, say, the Development Trust has, because we have the local people who have been living in the area all their lives. They know the wildlife, they know the land. Somebody who works from the council doesn't have that expertise, you know, and we have that, and it's free. But so what we've done is we're trying to work with the developer, because we know we can't beat them. So we're trying to get them to work with us on the environmentals, because we're an environmentally focused group. So we know that they're not going to, because they've already got the land. See, once they've got the land, they're going to do whatever it is they want. And planning is ticking boxes, really, if we're honest. But as a community group, we're seen as being NIMBYs, and, you know, we're just objecting to everything. But if you can get in there early enough and be part of the process and convince them that you're better on their side than holding back their development by all the Section 75 objections that you're going to lay down on them, which is what we do. We've learned in 3 years that this is what we have to do, and it's now working. So the developers are now, rather than destroying half of an ancient woodland, they're saying, okay, if you stop objecting to everything, we'll give you that half of the woodland. So,
Make yourself a problem.
yes.
Steg, one of the questions that you had, or one of the things that we spoke about at the start, was that you wanted to come here and learn about community land ownership. Sitting and listening tonight, I wondered, Iona or Johnny or Steg, what questions might you have about community land ownership?
Can I do it as a wrap?
What's that?
Can I do it as a wrap?
Go for it.
Land reform, where's it all gone wrong? End of wrap. Thank you very much. A practical example of where I live and work in Govan, there's a building called the Lyceum. It's privately owned. It's a beautiful building. Right now it's very dilapidated. We don't have much community spaces, so this is an ideal community space. We would love to be part of a community campaign to take over that building. We've spoken about it to other community groups. We're all ready to do it. This landlord's not going to let that happen. We haven't got the money to afford to take over this building. Is there any support available from the Scottish Government to shift rogue landlords out the way for community groups to take over these buildings and these infrastructures? Because that's a big problem for us. Unless we get it out the way, we can't go and get funding to take over the building.
That's a good question, Steg. So, in theory, at the moment, there's two ways of forcing a sale of a land or building that's not being used, or is, it's not being used in the public interest, is how I'd probably frame it. So there's the right to buy abandoned, neglected, and detrimental land, which a community can do. It's like an absolute right. It forces a sale. That's never been used. The threshold for proving it's abandoned, neglected, detrimental is too high. Landowner gets wind of it. They paint the fence. They mow a bit of the grass.
That is what happens.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens, Josh.
So that is, I'm trying to think of a polite, it makes a mockery of the principle of it. So, that's a failing bit of legislation. There is a second mechanism, which is called the right to buy for further sustainable development, which is, rather than saying the landowner's not using that, it's saying we have a better use for that than the landowner. And until a couple of weeks ago, that had never been used. But it has now been used by a community group, now community landowner, in St Andrews, who wanted to create, out of this relatively small vacant plot, they wanted to create a garden where people could go and read poetry, and I think it's going to be dedicated to Mary Queen of Scots. But basically, it was just being held by a land banker. It was owned by, I think, an offshore company in the Isle of Man, and they were just land banking it. But they have used this, and the Scottish Government, as a piece of good news, the Scottish Government, in their decision on this, the ministers have to say why they've approved it, and they explicitly say, we want this to set a precedent. We want this to be a marker to show that communities can use this right, and that if they can show that they will use this land for further sustainable development and will use it in the public interest, a landowner's property rights can be overturned. So that is one means of doing it, and it's a fairly arduous process, as I think the people at Poets Nuke would say, but the more communities that try and use this, the more precedent builds up, and that's when it actually starts turning things. And there is also opportunity in the new land reform bill to try and get mechanisms in there that force sale. So that's our basis for any kind of new legislation. You have to have a backstop, which is if that land or building is not being used as it should, it's not being used in the public interest, it's not being used to benefit that local area, that property ownership is like null and void. There's a forced sale. And then ideally the local community or just someone else can take ownership of it if they're going to use it productively, use it in the public interest. This is a kind of like a very live, ongoing piece of debate. But there is a piece of legislation there which, we can send you information on it. Yep.
No, plenty of time for questions.
There's a thing in Glasgow, or well, it's probably elsewhere, but I don't know, you'll seen it in communities, and it's called stalled spaces. But actually what it is, it's applying the creative energy, labour, efforts of a local community to improve a stalled space, and a property developer can take that space back at any point. So the community is allowed to use that space while the property developer isn't using it, but they have no rights. All the rights go to the property developer. So my concern is like that's already kind of in function, and that is sold as a success story across the world. Glasgow's a leader in that. Like, we have a problem. That is not good.
Thanks very much.
I was going to say that speaks to the heart of what we're talking about here, which is about ownership. And that's the problem if you get given short-term leases or if you're just given use of the space. It's not the same as ownership. If you've got ownership, as Maggie can attest to and other community landowners can attest to, you have means of raising funds. You've got ultimate decision over what happens. You're not there kind of with the prospect hanging over you of the lease coming to an end or a developer changing their mind or the council changing their mind, which is why when you hear people just talking about land management is important, but land ownership is like the fundamental question here, because that is what gives you power, that's what gives you like wealth and opportunity. And that's why, I mean, it'd be really interesting to hear about kind of like, or imagine what more community land ownership in Govan, where our office is as well, like how that could, if the community owned the graving docks, like what would that actually do for the local area, rather than having these kind of extractive developers owning so much.
We've got about 5-10 minutes before we wrap up. I just wonder if there are any other comments or questions from the audience.
I was just wanting to ask a similar question to what Iona asked, and I think, Josh, you touched on it a wee bit about energy levels and how much time, working class people can put into these types of endeavors or projects. And I'm not trying to kind of downplay how important it is to collectivize and how distributing kind of, labor within a process is a positive thing. Nonetheless, when there isn't kind of, financial backing or something, then community groups tend to kind of go at a much slower pace with these things, and then legislation changes, funding bodies lose money. So I'm just wondering if this is something that Community Land Scotland or any other organization is looking into in a meaningful way in terms of like providing community groups with, or community bodies with like more assistance, financial assistance.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's a very good question. It's a massive challenge, and I'm not going to defer, but I did see Carey come in somewhere, and she's at the back. Carey has ran the ownership hub and did work on poverty and inclusion related to community ownership. So I think it's probably better place to answer this.
Oh, I didn't actually hear the question. Hi, Jean. How's it going? I suppose I'll say that there was a lot of work going on these topics, which has been written up in reports, which people have been thinking about and wondering what should be published and what the request should be of government, what's the outcome. I had the absolute privilege of working on these issues for 4 years, and there's so many things that need to be changed. And so the reports are very long, and my boss is sitting next to me, and she's like, yeah, those are really long reports, Carey. So we're at the point of deciding what needs to be published. And coming out of that will hopefully be some things which will speak to these issues that are being raised. And you're reminding me I could go back and change those reports and add in more things, which I've thought about tonight. So it's a work in progress, really. And it'll be interesting to hear what happens next, and all the energy in this room and where you all take it.
And just to add on to that, it's just, yeah, Jean, it's something like we're very live to, and unfortunately the way we've been trying to frame it to government is that like, this is a good use of public money, this is like good value to support these kind of things, because the local development that happens when communities take ownership of land and buildings delivers like amazing value for money, to put it into their terms. And so actually the more support they can provide for this is vital, which is why it's so disappointing when something like the land fund gets cut, or there's kind of like precarity around so much of this funding, because we need that shift in mindset that Johnny was talking about, so they actually truly value this as much as they should. And I think it'd be really important to get into the public domain the research that Carey's talking about, hopefully do some further research to show them that the real disparity, or the kind of how the opportunity divide from communities that have more resource potentially, and those that are maybe from more working class backgrounds and can't access that in the same way.
Fantastic, thanks, Josh. Is there another question in the front?
Is this on? Yeah, great. Thanks so much. You touched a wee bit earlier about new legislation, and I wondered if you could expand a wee bit and whether you have any indication as to where the legislation next might be strengthened, and given all the challenges that have been raised tonight, is there anything in particular that it could help specifically with?
How long have you got? So I think the key thing is that the legislation is only going to do so much. Scottish Government always talks about land reform is like a journey. It's not an event. It's not, you know, a one-off thing. But this legislation is pretty weak. It's pretty poor. But we do see an opportunity to address the kind of issues that Steg was talking about if there is something called a public interest test, so like an actual assessment of land ownership. Like, is that land being used in a way which meets a kind of a public interest test? Is it being used in a way that's benefiting a wide number of people? Is that person, do they already own land in Scotland? Where do they live? Ideally, what's their tax residency? Some of those kind of big questions would be incredibly beneficial. An assessment of who's buying that land. Do they meet some of those criteria? And at the moment, as it stands, the land reform bill that's been introduced is just dealing with very large-scale land holdings in rural Scotland. And we are pushing very hard for it to include urban Scotland. And that would be through using a lot of political jargon, which I apologise for, so this idea of having sites of community significance. So the Lyceum that Steg's talking about could be identified by community bodies, a community body either in a local place plan or in a community action plan as being, this is an important site of community significance. The Land Commission can get involved, you know, kind of verify that. And then the land reform legislation applies to that site. So the landowner who's got a building they're not looking after, they'd have to produce a land management plan and say, like, this is what we're going to do with this site over the next 5 years. This is how we're engaging with the community. And our proposals are, if they don't do those things, then they start receiving financial penalties. And if they don't then pay those penalties and start complying with those other points, then questions get raised about the ownership and you get a forced sale. And whether that's at market value or not, I mean, it will have to be at market value dealing with the current restrictions that the imaginative political restrictions that we're put under. But say with some of the opportunities in places like Govan with those buildings, you know, that you get a realistic market value and the community could actually take ownership of it. So that's the kind of ideal that we're pushing for, but it's a way off. And if people care about this, you know, do sign up to our campaign. There's going to be opportunities in the next 6 months to contact your MSPs, put pressure on politicians, show people that we care about these things, and actually kind of push the government further. Because there are opportunities there, but you know, the legislation is not going to do everything, but it is an opportunity that won't come around for another kind of 5 to 10 years.
Fantastic, thanks very much, Josh. I think we've got a question at the back, and then the chap with the sleeves tattoo. Cheers, mate.
Hi everyone, thanks for the really interesting discussion. Yeah, I'm here from the Land Workers Alliance. So we do a lot of campaigning around land reform and land justice, mostly from the perspective of helping people who work on the land to have access to land and to land ownership and power over land. I just wanted to mention Josh was talking about the Kenmore example by Loch Tay of the Discovery Land Company buying up all this land to build a gated community for millionaires. And I just wanted to say that we're organising a protest about that, which will be by Loch Tay, like by this estate. So it's a really beautiful place to come for a day out if anyone wants to join us. But we're going to be doing a protest with some of the local community groups. We'll be there. Some people from Community Land Scotland, some of the local development trust will be there, and land workers, farmers, forestry workers. And while we're going to be partly highlighting that, like, you know, protesting against that specific issue, we're also going to be calling, it's John Swinney's constituency, we're going to be calling more broadly for much more meaningful land reform and for land justice in Scotland. And we're going to organise some lift chairs from Glasgow, so if folk are interested in coming along, that would be great. 28th of July, sorry, forgot that. Sunday, the 28th of July, yeah, in Kenmore.
Fantastic, thanks very much. Probably time for one more question down at the front, if that's all right.
I just wanted to ask about gifted land. Elder Park in Govan was gifted to the people of Govan by Isabella Elder, in memory of her brothers. The council aren't really looking after it very well. The deed of gift said that no part of the park could ever be sold or leased. We are part of a model boat club that use Elder Park Pond, and Glasgow City Council have given us a draft tenancy of lease for the pavilion in Elder Park, which amounts to about £900 a year they want. So, based on that, can the council do that? Have they got the right? They don't own the land. They are, at my understanding, they are commissioners of the land, and they're not looking. Part of the deed of gift said that they must look after the park. The gardens are going to waste. The pond's an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, I had a meeting with the Friends of Elder Park the other day. There's questions over who actually owns Elder Park. The council don't own it. No one's actually quite sure who owns it at the moment. The council only cut the grass because they feel obliged to do it. So that's something maybe, I don't know how you'll find that out. Maybe the old plans or something still exist. Maybe Josh can help with that. But Friends of Elder Park don't know who owns the park either. So they're kind of struggling with the farmhouse as well. So it's a big question. It's a big question. So I don't know who, again, that's a piece of land in our community, one of the few green spaces left that we don't know who owns it.
I think Josh wants to come in.
I don't know who owns it in that example, but this is an issue which I think someone mentioned earlier in terms of common good land, which is something that the Land Commission are looking at and the Land Commission are quite interested in. And the Land Commission are a resource for the people of Scotland to contact as well when they have particular issues. You know, they are that you can speak to them. But my understanding of the common good land is, so this is areas, quite significant areas all around Scotland that were gifted to the people and which have just been kind of subsumed into local authorities, but at a point at which the local authorities don't have a paper trail. So it's not really known, and it's kind of contested. And obviously local authorities are not keen on just kind of giving it up, but really they should be, because I mean it has been gifted to the people. I don't know if you want to come in on it.
Do you want to say something there?
Yeah, I can think of a few examples. The Pollock Free State, that was gifted to the people of Glasgow, and there was major protest there, but they went ahead and built the motorway anyway, and that was my dad and mum living there. My sister lived there when she was a baby, so it really is in the family. And there's plenty of places that are common good land, and they've just been taken over, and no one can figure out how it happened or why it happened, or do you know what I mean? It's one of those things that's just been pushed under the rug, so it really is ridiculous. But I think the thing is we need to claim it. How can we create a sense of ownership, whether or not they give us permission? Because, you know, communities can organise themselves, and even if they don't give us it, we can still use it like it's ours. Guerrilla activism as well, that's something I wanted to mention, because you won't always have the energy to go through the whole planning process and get the land the legitimate way. And sometimes you just need to take over and see what happens. And eventually they might give in. The legislation might have to change, you know?
Yeah, exactly. We have members who have done exactly that. You know, direct action can work, and it forces the hand, and the right thing is done. So yeah,
don't pay the council, pay Friends of Elder Park the £900 a year.
I mean, I'm really interested, and I would probably want to throw you under the bus a wee bit, Angus, to ask, you know, where would you direct a group like that? Who would it challenge? Would it be somebody like Govan Law Centre, or who's got experience in the past of challenging the councils on common good? Because I think the one that I wanted to say is to kind of dispel any myth that it might not be true, that they don't own it. I mean, our own, sorry Angus, like ask you for your opinion then talk over you, it's my MO. You know, I wanted to dispel any notion that it might not be true that they don't own it and they don't have any right to charge you. Certainly the community landowner that I used to work with, they, you know, first acquired the building through occupation, you know, and actually taking control of it, and that way then led to having the building for years and years. And when we went through the purchase process, and that was supported by the Scottish Land Fund, they provided 90% of the funding. What was clear to us from the dealings with Glasgow City Council is, by their own admission, they have absolutely no idea whether they own whatever percentage of the properties that they mortgaged off to HSBC
in Barclays, and there was no due diligence done on it because there's just far too many pieces of title. So they pretty much went to Barclays and the HSBC. We probably own most of this stuff, right? And you know, use it for giving us a mortgage on it, and you know, and that was by the, you know, the ALIOs and the council's own admission. So these things are to be challenged. I think we should look to try and find out for you where that's been done in the past. Do you know any examples, Angus?
Well, I was just going to say we'll do some land searches for you for nothing to find out what the paper trail is for that.
Who's we?
COS, Community Ownership Support Service.
So COS are part of, sorry for jumping in, Linda, the Development Trust Association Scotland. I think one of the things that probably we haven't been able to get across tonight with the changes in the lineup is actually the amount of energy that is being expended. You know, Angus and I have had conversations in the past about, you know, how depressing is it to think of all the work that's been done over the years, and communities in Govan are right back in the same situation that they've always been in. Where I probably have a slight, you know, different take on it is that actually the work of COS, the work of the Scottish Communities Alliance, the work of DTAS, the work of Community Land Scotland does now mean that there are hundreds of community landowners in Scotland that own thousands. Do you know the total acreage? 550 hectares. What is that in something that people who don't own horses understand? 3% of all of Scotland's land. So the amount of land in community ownership in Scotland is bigger than Aberdeen and Dundee City put together, right?
Should be a lot bigger.
I think that's true. I remember making it up at another presentation. But, you know, there are literally hundreds and thousands of people who are getting involved in moves like this. And whilst it's far from being ideal, whilst there's far too many hurdles being placed in people's ways, actually you're not alone in these movements. There are organisations like DTAS, like Community Land Scotland. There's a great heritage of organisations like Inchinnan, all the way up to the Highlands and Islands, who've went through that and who are willing to put that support in. Now, whether you can actually be asked with all the other things that you've got to do in life to fight the council over 900 quid for a boating pond, at some point you go, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I've got that energy in me. But actually, there is a kind of principle in there, which is to say, like, listen, you don't own that land. We're not giving you 900 quid. You know, chase yourself. You know, and unfortunately, that whole, well, listen, you stole it, so we're stealing it back mentality, it does, yes, liberate, it does sometimes pay dividends. But I think, you know, Linda, will you come and have a chat? Happy days. Did you want to say something, Maggie, before we...
No, I was just going to say community asset transfer. I mean, we did one with Ramshire Council for our village playing fields. I'm sure if the guys had a community group that was interested in looking after the parks, that the council, if you note the interest, they have to look into it. I don't think they can refuse if you've got a good case for it, if you've got a business plan. And
I mean, there's definitely, I think that, you know, as much as, I mean, theoretically, they should respond within 12 weeks if you put in a community asset transfer, right? And they should get back to you, theoretically. But I think a good starting point is to find out, you know, do that double search. COS have got some money there that will put a lawyer on it, and they'll be able to give you to say, right, this is what it is. But this idea that common good land is getting sold off, pretty sure David Murray, the old Rangers chief, he bought, you know, half a Waverley station for £1, and that was common good land. So unfortunately, despite the fact that people are fighting with all the issues that Steg and Iona have been talked about, unfortunately, despite the fact that working people don't have the time and the resources to be able to survive, sometimes never mind then start to organise and invent a huge new economic system that's going to value social and environmental capital alongside financial capital. I'm sorry to tell you that there isn't actually that much more choice. You know, nobody else is going to come and invent this new system for you. And as imperfect as it is, and as fumbling along as you're going to be, that is the other solution. But there are plenty of people around Scotland, around the world, who are already involved in this, and it's better than Britain's Got Talent, at least, you know. Yeah. So, did you want to say something? Somebody moved there. Did you want to say something just before we invite Jessie? I think has got bored, and Josie has got bored and ran away. No, she's not. She's up at the back, and she's going to come and save me by playing some fantastic music for us. So if everybody could maybe just put their hands together and welcome Josie up to the stage, please.
Hey, so it's been so interesting hearing you guys talk, and I learned so much tonight, and I'm thinking about it through a musical lens and with connection to land. And the Gaelic language has a lot of evidence of how connected to land and nature people used to be. And one thing I like, I can't remember the word, maybe you know the word, but there's a Gaelic word for a half-built nest. And there's words for loads of things that we wouldn't have a single word for. I think it just shows how connected people were to land at the time. But I'm going to sing you a song from the Isle of Lewis, which is where I'm from myself. I'm going to sing you a song about the land clearances, but then I'll sing you something more cheerful after. This song is a man coming home to his village of Doble, and he's saying that he can hear the sound of the sea, the same as it always was, but everything else is completely different. There's nobody running along the beach. It's just, the only constant is the sound of the sea. Chlein mi fuim na mare. Chlein mi fuim na mare. Nor chlein mi fuim at gekroiri klatoch. Bifesami kuvel mis nadale. Alle mara hendras nam jalig. Tornien arach marvari mare. En glon choling treise vachir. Snaljogen frøy, her gachtef kurmashe. Smorgach smoinje vailoe mare. Gumorgen köchlak hiker balle. Over me ogan gumfrøygnem falloch. Nevauner akka skachlar och fallu. Get very shose fiogrovati. Leket bibio and doi befallen. En alla morgen budja noch jani. Gun suri stor ach bibio viaken. Chlein mi fuim na mare. Chlein mi fuim na mare. Nor chlein mi fuim at gekroiri klatoch. Bifesami kuvel mis nadale. Thank you very much. This is such a nice space to sing in. My goodness. I'm gonna sing another wee song. Leave you with another song. And this is a song that I wrote for Hebridean Celtic Festival. I did a project for them called Inturisgaki, which means the journey home. And this is a song called Carry Me Home, and it's essentially a love song to the ferry, which I'm very accustomed to. And it was nice to reframe it that way, because often I'm like, oh, the ferry, you know? Rolling your eyes, 3 hours. But then when I did this project, I was noticing all these little parts of that journey that I can really easily take for granted, and kind of reframed the way I think about it. But I think one really cool thing about like being an artist and doing music is you kind of give yourself permission to notice things like that, and it's been so good for me, and I think everyone deserves that. So anyway, here's a song called Carry Me Home. You're very welcome to join in the chorus if you pick up on it. The darkness of the winter day surrendered to the light. The starlings gathered overhead and scattered through the night. I feel the stretches and the swells as we are carried over to make our way home. Follow the flight of the ringed plover. Time may carry me anywhere, but you will carry me home. Taste the salt that's in the air, the ocean spray and foam. Time may carry me anywhere, but you will carry me home. Taste the salt that's in the air, the ocean spray and foam. You will carry me home. You will carry me home. A dolphin leaping into sight before the waves snatch her closer on our homeward flight. The diving oyster catcher, from purples turquoise into blue, Atlantic hues competing. Hold on to each side, for you know it's only fleeting. Time may carry me anywhere, but you will carry me home. Taste the salt that's in the air, the ocean spray and foam. Time may carry me anywhere, but you will carry me home. Taste the salt that's in the air, the ocean spray and foam. You will carry me home. You will carry me home. Carry me home. Time may carry me anywhere, but you will carry me home. Taste the salt that's in the air, the ocean spray and foam.
Fantastic, thanks very much, Josie. And everybody can find Josie Duncan's music on Spotify. There's a couple of albums there, for I'm sure everybody enjoyed that a lot and wants to find out more about that. So it's just coming to the end of the evening tonight. I want to thank Maggie, Steg, Johnny, Elna for joining us. I want to thank Josh for being a stand-in body double for Stephen this evening. I want to thank you all for joining us and for getting involved in the conversation. I think actually the more that we got you involved, the better the conversation was. So I hope that you'll take the chance to come and have some more intimate chats. I don't mean about intimate topics, sorry to disappoint anybody, but more one-on-one or small group chats around community ownership in the Hugging, in the Butterfly and Pig, which is just round the corner on Bath Street. There's a space which is booked in there as well. So thanks very much to everybody who's worked in the background. There's usually somebody working hard to make sure these things go off without a hitch. That's Meg in the background, and thanks to the chaps up at the top for doing the sound, and thanks once again to you all for joining us this evening. Cheers.
And thanks to Martin for chairing as well.